So this is the third chapter we've had this year, and this is by far the biggest significance-wise of all of the chapters, as what we get a look into is the origins of the Skull Knight a little more, and some bits of information that could very much shake the foundation of what we knew about Berserk and the history behind all of the events that occur within Berserk. But before I do get into that, if you are new to the channel, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and turn on the bell notifications. And without further ado, cue the intro. Okay, so two things. One, of course, spoilers. If you haven't read the chapter, check it out for yourself. But the second thing is I was pretty sure the chapter was supposed to come out tomorrow, which is the 23rd, and what I read seemed a little bit short for a chapter, nonetheless huge and momentous, but that's probably why we're getting another chapter in November. I believe it's around November 13th, because this chapter was so short. Regardless, this is probably one of the biggest chapters in Berserk, and I'm not saying that to over-exaggerate. I mean, this is quite huge, as the Skull Knight is one of the most important pieces to understanding the overall origins within the world of Berserk, and what ends up happening is we get a look into his past. Now, to give some context for what has been happening, in chapter 361, we find out that the Berserker armor is yet to be fully mastered. And well, now Guts is going to be going through this arduous and of course difficult path, as it usually is for Guts, to master the Berserker armor. Now, I talked on another channel with GR Chris, and me and Real Life Ryan have been speculating about this now, how this all kind of feels like the perfect timing to reveal some of the origins of the Skull Knight, as we're getting to know more and more people who seem to know the Skull Knight on a more personal level before he did become the Skull Knight. So here, what ends up happening is Guts gets hit with the hammer, right? He gets dinked in the armor, and through what is called a blood memory, he's able to see visions of what the Skull Knight went through. His armor starts to hold itself and put itself in the same position that the Skull Knight was in his final moments. As a Berserk fan, I don't really think I need to explain the importance of knowing or at least seeing what happened to Skull Knight in his final moments. Now, they don't really go too much into depth. We don't know all of the specifics of what happened, but we do see the environment and what's going on, and what we do end up seeing is the Skull Knight holding a lady in his arms. And by the look in the eyes of the Skull Knight at the time, it seems like that was very possibly the love of his life. Now, what I could not have prepared for was this. So in one of the panels, what we end up seeing is the God Hand from a distance. We see the God Hand far away, and we see their silhouettes. Now, I'm assuming that it's Void, Slan, Ubik, Conrad, but as I was reading it and I saw the fifth silhouette, I was like, wait, if these are the blood memories of the Skull Knight, then what? Femto is not supposed to be there. And when we get a close-up look to the God Hand, there are 4 other members, and then there's Void. This is huge, because that means that either those other 4 are not members of the God Hand, and they are something else entirely, or the God Hand changes every now and then, but Void has stayed the same. That is huge. That is not what I thought. That's not what I think any of us thought was possible. I personally did believe that Void, Slan, Conrad, and Ubik were there at least from the time Skull Knight had become the Skull Knight, or it was just Void who became the original member of the God Hand, and then the other 4 came along as the years continued, Griffith being the final one. If this 4 that we see with Void are the original members of the God Hand, that means 1, they can be defeated, or 2, something happened. Okay, something huge happened that we do not know yet. What's interesting to see throughout all of this is Guts' reaction as he's being held down with chains, and he's eventually pulled out by Shirka, but as he's looking into the memories of the Skull Knight, and then he's eventually snapped out of it. What's interesting is to hear Guts say, "I saw the end," and then he looks at the Skull Knight. And then the Skull Knight says to him, "What you saw was visions of a foolish king, and the beginning of a dead man stalking the endless night." Now, I don't know why, but for some reason, it seems I may have misread it, but I originally thought he was referring to himself and then Void, or Void and then himself. But of course, he's just referring to himself, as through lore, what we do know is that the Skull Knight was the previous owner of the Berserk armor, and it was very highly speculated, basically confirmed that he was once known as King Geyserich. So this was already previous knowledge, but yet to hear the Skull Knight put it into this way, he's essentially getting into how he once was a king and now became what he is today, the Skull Knight, or as he says, the dead man stalking the endless night. This is ginormous news, and this is going to be very interesting to see what else we seem to learn within this next chapter. So from what we do know in this chapter, if anything, because there's a lot to be speculated, especially when it comes to that, I'm just going to call him the quote-unquote different God Hand, because that's huge, and I don't really even know how to wrap my mind around that. But seeing how Guts kind of resonated with the memory that happened, and Guts thinking that what he saw was the end, for Skull Knight to then correct him, I think again shows the laws of causality within the world of Berserk, events repeating in a very similar fashion, and Guts seems to be the candidate of the Skull Knight, if you will, to break the cycle and to end the quote-unquote endless night. There are so many different ways the next chapter could go, chapter 363, kind of leading off of this chapter in 362. It's interesting to see the attitude of the Skull Knight when he says you witness the end of a foolish king, showing that there is a level of regret to the actions that led to his demise and all of the events that ended up happening to him. So this could be leading to one of the things I addressed in the theory video when it came to Void, Skull Knight, is essentially it was very possible that the Skull Knight was a king once, but not a very good one that got drunk with power, with bloodlust, and that's what pushed Void into using, well, the Bailet. But that's just theory and speculation on my part. Again, also interesting to see the person that was in the Skull Knight's arms in the final moments, a girl who was branded. That could have easily been Skull Knight's version of Casca. Another thing that would have led to the tone of regret that seems to be in his voice. But despite all that being dropped on us, it still doesn't compare to what seemed to be a different version of the God Hand, but with Void still being there. That really does open up the door of possibilities as for what the heck this cycle entails, how long this has really been going on for. And so now the doors have been broken the doors have been blown off in terms of possibilities for the most important characters in the world of Berserk. We did not see Casca at all in this chapter. It's very possible that we see her in the next chapter entailing all of this, or maybe her and Guts stay separated for a little bit, as it seems Guts is going to be undergoing a very arduous and important process nonetheless. We also did not see Farnese in this chapter, so it seems that she's probably doing her own thing. Casca's just resting during all of this, and this is huge. This is a big chapter, and I think it's going to send a lot of Berserk fans into a frenzy about speculation for what could happen next and for what all this entails. Hopefully you did enjoy this video. The link to the chapter will be in the description below. As always, this has been The Masked Man. Hope everyone has a blessed rest of the day, and peace.